Hello and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Scott Keith. This morning I am joined by the normal cast of characters. I'm going to go, Caleb always gets to go last, I think, right? Or do you say your name first?
I think on this show I say my name first. On Outlaw.
Oh, okay.
I don't
know. Well, then
which.
You're going to be
last
this time. Okay, Bruce Hilman, Adam Francisco, and my son, Caleb Keith. We are finally, Thinking Fellows is part of the 1517 Podcast Network. If you'd like to find out more about the 1517 Podcast Network or anything 1517, go over to 1517.org. That is 1517.org. There you can find articles, upcoming conferences, publishing house materials, podcasts, craft of preaching project, make you a better preacher, all the other good stuff that we do that I'm now forgetting. Podcasts, that's it, yeah. Or you could hit the donate button up in the upper right-hand corner and help support all of this free content that we put out every day, every week, every month, every year. All right. We are finally finishing up, and I say finally, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Today is The Return of the King, right?
Yep.
Which is the final book in the trilogy. Caleb has asked me to host because apparently I haven't added much good material.
Nope.
As we've gone through the other two books. So instead, I will host, which will allow basically Caleb and Bruce to tell us what this book is all about, and for Adam to get some input where he feels like he can or should, and we'll go from there. Sound good? So how we've done this in the last two episodes on Lord of the Rings is worked out pretty well. We have started by asking Bruce. So, Bruce, would you mind giving us a short synopsis of this book?
Sure. So our main characters, our heroes, face various temptations, which most of them overcome. Good defeats evil in the end, and then it is a very long end.
Yeah.
As they make their way back, and they have the scourging of the Shire. And then everyone goes off, well, not everyone, but, some of the characters go off to the Grey Havens. The book's done.
All right. So let's kind of take it. That was a little shorter than I expected. Let's kind of take it sort of part by part.
Well, we were working with the quick.
You were working with 30 seconds. That was more like 10 seconds.
That was the longest of his short introductions.
It was the longest of the three books, though, I think, wasn't it?
Was it really the longest of the short?
It is the longest of the three books, and that ending is long.
Yeah.
It's a long ending.
Yeah. So, let's go from, just in case our listeners have forgotten, because I think and as far as show releases might have gone, this is actually one of the longer gaps, I think. We've had two in between.
We did have two in between.
Yeah, so why don't we remind them where the Two Towers left off and where this book picks up?
Two Towers leaves off with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum. That's really
the secret character Fran.
and the secret character Fram. Past the Black Gate in Mordor,
right?
Sort of continuing to venture to destroy the ring, and it leaves. I think you can just sort of break it off into the second character group at that point, which is Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and Gandalf. By the end of Two Towers, is back with that group. I think imminently headed to Gondor to sort of secure an army. They realize they need more of an army than they've had, I think is what the end of Two Towers leaves us with. And so the armies of men sort of need to gather together is where Two Towers end.
Okay. And where do we pick up in The Return of the King?
What?
Well, they're making Gandalf and Merry have made their way to Gondor, where they meet Denethor, who is kind of crazy with grief over Boromir, and is also just sort of a crazy, power-hungry maniac anyway. And all that comes to the fold. Let's see, Merry enters his service, and then has to light the beacons. And then, of course, the Rohirrim hear about it, and they come. But not before Strider has to take a detour into what I will call Hades, so that Scott can enjoy it even a little bit more.
Yeah. That helped me, actually.
Very like Aeneid esque sort of journey, right?
Yeah.
Sort of Achilles going down to the realm of the dead, seeing four bears. Well, I'm referencing it to Achilles.
Oh,
It's obviously not Achilles.
It is interesting you bring that up because a lot of scholars have pointed out the long ending is actually probably taken from the Odyssey, because the Odyssey does the exact same thing with the main characters. And so he was probably had that in mind, which I found surprising when I was looking this up, because I always thought the ending was more like a Grail legend, because, they have to go find the Grail. But the story when you find the Holy Grail, it's not over when you find the Grail. Like, the knights always have to go back, and there's a moral part to the whole tale. And I always thought that was sort of the moral ending, but it's more directly corresponds, according to those who really, I guess, study this, to the Odyssey.
What's interesting is, so The Hobbit has a subtitle, or within the Lord of the Rings, actually, later has its real title, which is There and Back Again.
Yeah.
And really what we get in The Hobbit is the there, and sort of like he makes it, and then he makes it back, right? And with this, the goodbyes really do, in the end, really do make it there and back again, almost, because a third of the final book is about the back again, and sort of what that entails for each of the characters. Like, if you're used to shorter, like you've talked about, Lewis style storytelling, it almost feels like, he didn't know how to end this book, and he wanted to add some sort of other dimension to it, maybe moral dimension at the end with the Shire. It really does kind of, for me though, silence some of the criticism of Tolkien that his world is too. I keep running across this online, that the big criticism is everything's too black and white, that evil isn't nuanced enough, that good and bad are just put in your face, and that, once you drop the ring in the volcano, it's over. That couldn't be farther from the truth.
That was always a little confusing to me, because you kind of have two sort of major battles in this book, right? You've got the one at
Pelennor Fields, which is outside of
Gondor, and then the one at the Black Gate, right? Or the one that's will happen at the Black Gate. When
you have the battle in the Shire, Bywater?
Yeah, Battle of Bywater.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting that the battles, I guess it's not interesting, it's the whole kind of point of the trilogy, I guess, but that the individual battles matter a lot less than the ring getting dumped into the volcano, and that the battles are basically, all the battles are just basically buying time for the hobbits to get where they need to go and to do what they need to do with the ring, which is sort of not really how battles usually work. In ideals, I guess, in a quote unquote ideal war situation, a battle matters in and of itself. And the only thing that, even if, say, the Battle of Gondor, they won that, if the ring hadn't then eventually been destroyed, he would have just raised another army and gone at Gondor again. And since they no longer had the help of the army of the dead, they certainly lost the next one. So
I sort of feel like it would be, this is making up history a bit, but like the Normandy invasion, but when we invaded Normandy, it wasn't like the Third Reich just fell right afterwards. But imagine if the Third Reich had or was very extremely close to developing a nuclear weapon, and you had another group of spies who were trying to intercept the plans and destroy the bomb. Well, you could say Normandy doesn't matter because if there's this bomb being built, and if it's made, the whole thing's over anyway. Or you could say, well, there's actually the battle at Gondor does matter, because the way it matters is men once again find their mettle.
Sure.
I see. They once again kind of redeem. They get redeemed in a sense. Men get redeemed.
And Aragorn finds his kingship. So, which is probably as important as anything else in the book.
It is, and it, it doesn't. I guess this happens more in the expanded lore, but something really about the Númenórean, these island sort of, I don't know, 1/100th, maybe 1/100th and a 16th% elvish men at this point is interesting because the King of Gondor has all sorts of powers as well that sort of go beyond the scope of normal men. Like he can heal. Yeah, Adam. Yeah, he can heal, and he can use the Palantirs or the Seeing Stones as well in such a way that Sauron can be combated through the Seeing Stones, not just control or see your mind. So you can see, like, some of this leaves to me why Tolkien has this like expanded encyclopedias of stuff, because for all the explaining he tends to do, all of a sudden you have sort of like, and Númenor is important, and we're not going to talk about it at all. And it makes the King of Gondor extremely unique.
Well, it's given Amazon an opportunity to make a lot of money.
Yeah, that's true. Sure. Yeah, and it makes the King of Gondor, much more important than sort of these other kings of men as in this final.
Well, and he's
sort of
exceptionally
conflict.
long-lived and everything, isn't he?
Yeah, like twice as old as other men, and so
he's a Dunedain.
Yeah. So it just ends up sort of interesting for that reason, but there's nothing wrong with it. But it is like you can see why other books become sort of necessary as questions get left behind.
Yeah. I actually was curious, this is an aside. Adam, you have a military background, and granted the battles in this book are fantasy battles, but Tolkien was a soldier as well. Like, how does he do in writing battle scenes, do you think?
Well, when you were talking about how while the ring had to be destroyed, otherwise there'd be more battles, right? I was thinking about in military history, they often reference in the past in warfare there were always these decisive battles, like one big battle,
and
that would end it. And if you're asking about the details of the battle, I mean it's a totally different thing here, right?
Yeah, no, I guess I'm just asking. Like, he was a soldier, so he had to write somewhat out of his context, but he's writing about an ancient warfare, and he's combining it with fantasy. So,
well, but the battles he was in were more
trench warfare,
more akin to sort of what he writes about, where it's just like, thousands of people on thousands of people. I mean, that's a whole different thing than we've fought in a long time.
At least, I know, Scott, you must have. Bruce, maybe you too. When you were a kid, did you grow up playing war?
Oh, yeah.
And you go to the local woods or whatever and run around. It's
exactly what happened.
Vietnam's in the background, right?
Yeah.
It's jungle warfare.
Yep.
And now I imagine kids, if they do play war, probably they don't. Well, they must they do on screens, but it'd be house to house, I guess. But
yeah, wow.
But certainly, to get back to your question, Bruce, now that it's a little more clear in my mind, it does reflect what I imagine in a fantastical way what World War I must have felt like. This grinding war of attrition, with thousands upon thousands being mowed down in a minute.
Yeah, well, was it Stalin that said quantity is a quality all unto itself when it comes to warfare?
Yeah.
That you don't have to be the best soldiers, you don't have to be the most well-trained soldiers. You just have to throw thousands and thousands and thousands of men at the other side, and eventually you'll reign, because they can't take it, even if they have more advanced weaponry and everything. If you have enough people,
that sort of enhances Sauron's faceless quality throughout the book, because I think one of the ways you can and look at something like the World Wars is look at how many thousands, millions of people are involved without ever hearing the voice or seeing the face of the person who actually commanded them to go to war.
Well, I've often thought, like, you can take especially World War One, I think, and I don't know how we got on this, but now I'm interested. That would have been a very, of all of the wars to serve in and to just go and have a very good chance that if you go, you are going to die in this war. It'd be a difficult one. You could say the same thing about, I think, Korea and Vietnam. You don't really know why you're doing this. I think they probably even had a better sort of rationale thrown at them in Korea and Vietnam than they did in World War One. Unless you were French, that makes sense, right? You're defending France, or German, I suppose, and you're defending Germany. But if you're one of these other countries, England, United States, heck, even Russia to some degree in World War One, why are you doing this? And then you show up to the front lines and you see that the method of gaining 100 yards is to throw 20,000 men at the other side as sacrifice, and that you might gain 100 yards, 500 yards, whatever, on a what might, I would think, seem to you as sort of line soldier, a very arbitrary line. Mm-hmm. And so to do that, that takes some, I don't even know how to describe it. I guess I'd describe it as bravery. But it's sure something.
What's it take to do that as the one calling the shots, as the general or whatever? Just like choosing, here's 20,000 men, just send them off to the
I have no idea, man.
My goodness.
I don't know. I'm not like a soldier like Adam was, but it just seemed, the way we do it now is just wholly different. It's just wholly different.
Yeah.
A little trivia from the films and related to war is Christopher Lee, who played Saruman, was in World War II. And actually, he's the only actor on the film who met Tolkien as a child. And he absolutely loves Lord of the Rings. He would read them every year of his life. He would read the whole trilogy. So, Scott, you probably didn't want to be in a room with him.
Listen, man. I appreciate people that appreciate this more than I do.
He was originally thought of as being Gandalf. That's what they originally had in mind. Right. Then they cast him as Saruman. And in the film, when Wormtongue stabs him in the back on the tower, which is, of course, different than how it happens in the book where they're killed in the Shire. But in that scene, Peter Jackson wanted him to scream, wanted Christopher Lee to scream. And he said, no, that's not what happens when people get stabbed in the back, because he had watched it multiple times in World War II when people were bayoneted. And he said they never scream. They always are shocked by it. Yeah. And so I'm not gonna scream. It'll be more realistic. It's kind of a sad and amazing commentary.
I wonder what battle he was in.
I don't know. He said he's seen it many, many times. He said never heard a man scream when he was stabbed in the back. It's never happened.
Christopher Lee was like special operations and
also, I believe, holds the Guinness World Record for being in the most films of any actor.
Samuel Jackson's coming after him.
Yeah,
there's quite a few. Yeah,
interesting.
But anyway, that's.
Well, I was gonna say, this is totally off topic again. From what I've heard, and I haven't followed it as closely as I'm sure most people, but the war in Ukraine has kind of brought back some of this, especially from the Russians to the Ukrainians. If we can just sort of throw enough men at the situation.
Yeah. So. Yeah, they're just cannon fodder on the Russian side.
And not a lot of ground is being made. There's not like you don't open the news and hear about the amount of progress.
But if you know anything about Russia's history of war and you're the Ukrainians and you hear Putin say he's going to enlist another 500,000, you're not going to be too happy about that.
You are right, though. It does kind of ring of a good versus evil, and freedom versus it. All those themes that you can see in the books is in that conflict right now.
Yeah,
as well. Interestingly, so if you read the scholarship on the last book, the thing that at least my understanding of the thing that all the scholars agree with is that the last two chapters are, particularly the penultimate chapter, the second to the last chapter, is not only the most important chapter in the book, but probably the most important chapter in the trilogy. And that's the scourging of the Shire.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, since I'm hosting.
Since it's also not in
here's
the
here's what's weird about that. It's not usually the most enjoyed part of the book by even fans of the books. They don't tend to like the ending. It drags out for many of them. Tolkien explicitly said on multiple occasions it was not an allegory for industrialization. And yet, almost all the scholarship now agrees that it is, and that he just probably wasn't aware. Like, he didn't deliberately sit down to write an allegory, but that's clearly just what it is. Like, the mill gets replaced by an industry, and it pollutes the air and the river,
and he does
the whole
same thing at Isengard, and it's Sauron again in the Shire. I also wonder if so Tolkien is also well documented as a very strong sort of nationalist patriot for the United Kingdom and his love for Britain. And so I sort of wonder if, like, his comments about that this isn't about industrialization are actually sort of that ringing true. His patriotism, saying, "I'm not trying to drag Britain down with this novel."
Well, yeah, because Britain had to industrialize to a major degree for them to, participate and eventually be on the winning side in both of the world wars.
And he was well documented as not loving that, like not loving the expansion of roads through certain areas and into neighborhoods, and but yeah, I just wonder if part of his sort of his love for his country goes, yeah, I'm not trying to say that Britain's headed south, sort of thing. When it comes to, even though it is obviously about industrialization, I mean, you're turning the quaint grass fields of Britain into an industrial machine.
Yeah.
Well, and scholars point out too in that chapter something interesting, which is that Frodo doesn't fight, but they say that he has the kind of what I've read is that he has he morally fights in that section. It's Frodo's moral fight, but not his. He doesn't physically get involved in the action. And then of course he goes to the Grey Havens, which I think is probably, whether he knew it or not, Tolkien knew it or not, like the guy's shell shocked, and Tolkien saw all these guys coming back from World War I shell shocked, and like Frodo had like what else? There's nothing left for him. He never fully heals, so Tolkien invents this place for him to go where he can heal. And I have to think in some ways it's a reminder of all the boys that he saw who just never were the same after the trench warfare.
So for the listeners who maybe only watched the movies, what happens in the Shire makes the two things makes the ending so long, and sort of why would it? I actually the Peter Kreeft interview, he talks a little bit about why why Peter Jackson said he didn't include it in the movies.
Kreeft isn't happy about that because all the scholars of the books know that's an important, very important chapter.
So what goes on here? What is this whole episode?
So Gandalf and Galadriel say goodbye to Treebeard, and they make their way to the Grey Havens, and then the hobbits make their way back to the Shire, but they find the Shire is under the control of a character named Sharky. I think that's how you say it.
Sharky.
Yeah, which is such a...
It's like a pool hall bully.
Yeah, exactly, a pool hall guy. Who ends up actually being Saruman, who's lost all his power except for the power of his deceptive voice. He still has the power of the voice, but he's lost his other power. And Wormtongue is there as his kind of right-hand man. And they have taken over the Shire, and they've turned it into an industrial place. The mill was torn down, and this industrial factory was put in its place, and it pollutes the air, and it pollutes the water.
And they found men to come in and work it too, in addition to hobbits. So now the hobbits is occupied by, or the Shire, and the hobbits are occupied by men.
So Merry and Pippin essentially break out into two fronts, and they gather up tons of hobbits, and a battle eventually ensues. And then they win, the hobbits win, and Frodo confronts Saruman and Wormtongue, and he wants to let Saruman live, but Saruman outs some of Wormtongue's bad deeds, and Wormtongue gets mad about this and slits his throat. And then Wormtongue is killed
by hobbits.
by hobbits, which is a sad way to go, I guess. But before he dies, Saruman says the reason he scourged the Shire was for revenge.
Right.
So I guess I left out that's an important point. And then they take apart the factory and they rebuild the mill, and they take the parts from the factory and they use it to rebuild Hobbiton in the Shire. And then after a year or two, Frodo has to go to the Grey Havens, and Sam takes all these seeds and stuff from Lothlorien, and he replants all the trees that were burned in industry, and everyone lives happily ever after.
Yeah. But an interesting commentary, and in my opinion, always felt a little thrown in.
It does demonstrate the difference in some of the Hobbits' journeys. Like you're pointing out, Bruce, so Frodo doesn't fight in the conflict. He even takes, when it comes to the captured Sauron, he is the one who convinces the Hobbits not to execute him. And then
Right.
Wormtongue kills him, sort of learning a lesson from all the way back at the Fellowship of the Ring, when he asks Gandalf why he hasn't killed Gollum.
Yeah.
He sort of learning the lesson of the weight of being a judge of determining people's souls. And then, at the beginning of this conflict, Merry and Pippin show sort of a different development. Like you said, they have learned military strategy on their journey. They have become sort of generals in an army, and they draft up the two armies. And like Pippin has apparently become a very keen warrior on his time with Aragorn, because like it tells you how many bodies he stacks up, and it's quite a few for a hobbit. So it's definitely
There's a
interesting.
giant Took army. Like Pippin has lots of relatives.
He's got a big family. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sam, the story about Sam at like in the Shire revolves around returning to his family, which is like a detail sort of left out in Fellowship, right? He has like,
Well, and in the movies, he's sweet on that hobbity girl, and when he gets back, they show him
with kids.
Well, when he gets back, they show him like courting her, and then eventually he's got kids.
Yeah.
But he's also in many ways, he's the one who renews. He's the planter.
Yeah.
You know, he renews the garden, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
He has a renewal role, which is his servant role, right? Like he's a servant the whole time. So now he's a servant to the Shire. Like he replants it, and in some ways he's a servant to the elves because he uses their magic to do it. So he's really he's probably the most selfless character in the book.
They did
even more than Aragorn. Like that's just his main ethic, I think, is selflessness.
Yeah, they do show a better. I think of the book has a. I mean, so Peter Jackson also like obviously amplifies that because the book has Sam putting on the ring like 3 times once Frodo has been sort of stung by Shelob, and that's in Two Towers actually in the books, but then by the time the Return of the King has happened, Sam has put the ring on 3 times and did struggle to give it back to Frodo, just like everybody else who's been tempted by the ring. So to bring in sort of your summary at the beginning, Bruce, that we're into a temptation element here as well. And so so I don't know. He does seem to come out the most unscathed from it, but they certainly, at least Tolkien puts an element where Sam's selflessness is tested by sort of a temporary mistrust of Frodo to get the job done. Is so like Sam, unlike the men, isn't tempted to keep it to push
rule the world.
Yeah, to push back Sauron's army to use its power against Sauron, but is tempted to keep it because he thinks he can finish the job and Frodo can't.
All right.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So riddle me this: why? And if it's explained and I missed it, again, this is my feeling, not the books, I'm sure. But I still don't get I must not understand the complete like interconnection between Sauron and the ring,
Oh yeah.
and why like simply tossing this thing into the volcano all of a sudden just means, all right, no more Sauron. It's like, hey, let's keep going. Like it's not,
Yeah.
you don't see like this decisive battle with an all of a sudden embodied Sauron where Aragorn thrusts his sword through his heart and you don't got to worry about him anymore.
So
You just sort of, I don't know, it seems a little anticlimactic.
Functionally here, if you go back all the way to the Fellowship of the Ring and sort of the defeat of Sauron that leaves a seemingly gone Sauron and a ring, is not that he was actually defeated, like physically, so his arm is severed, but that in that moment he actually takes his essence, his ends, his being, and puts
essentially
his soul, and puts most of it into the ring. The thing that's hard is he's like, and this happens with expand. Again, this is where some of this expansion. He's functionally another worldly being, which turns out Gandalf and wizards are as well. They're foreign to Middle Earth. He's one of these same. He has the essence of one of these mystical beings who can sort of do these things, and he splits his soul into pieces, and most of it resides in the ring. And if the pieces of him are reunited, he will have enough power to take a physical form. Now, he's not going to scourge the earth just with the physical form, but the physical form makes his job easier, which is essentially, I think at this point, deceiving men into like expanding the world of men according to his designs across Middle-earth, to driving the elves out, to putting the final nail in the coffin on the dwarves, to industrializing Middle-earth, and to ruling it by ruling the sort of the souls and the wills of men. The reason he needs the ring is the mechanism by which he can offer power and expand his power throughout the realms of men and Middle-earth. Not because he's going to be menacingly big or strong, but because it has 75% of him in it.
I think that's probably the best answer you can get for a kind of rational, logical understanding of it. But I tend to think actually that it's more allegorical or symbolic.
Oh, no.
Anyway.
There we go. I tried to make it as practical as possible.
Yeah, you made it, practical is a better word. You made it very practical. But I mean, for me, this is just my opinion, it's a bastardized incarnation, the whole thing, with Sauron in the ring. And I mean, he is, in one sense, if the ring is the body and his malice and his soul is in the ring, then you have that duality of body and soul. But why is it a ring? Well, because it's gold and it gleams and it's idolatry and it's temptation and it's all the things men want. Mm-hmm. That's why he made it a ring. It also has an eternal quality to it because it's a ring. And like I said the last time we went over this, the only way to really defeat him is by a sacrifice. It's not just that the ring is destroyed. A sacrifice is given in the fire, which is Gollum. And it's a horrible sacrifice, but if you want to get super Christian on it, and I'm not saying Tolkien was directly writing this, but I'm just saying, like I said last time, it's like when Christ took on sin. Gollum is that pathetic creature. He's a hobbit who's been corrupted. He's a hobbit who is not meeting his potential of what a hobbit should be. And he has to be sacrificed in order for this to happen. And that's when I said, he's ugly and he's not comely. And that's when Adam said he wanted to reach across the street and strangle me. But in any case,
say that?
You did say that. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay.
You might have been particularly
and then I said it was
crusty
heraldic speech. That was.
I may have had some Irish in my coffee. When I said that.
It's okay. It's okay. But so I think what he's trying to do, he doesn't have a real great practical reason for this. It's like with a lot of stories, like you just can't explain the backstory to every single thing. At some point, you just have to assume the universe. Like, where'd the Force come from in Star Wars? They tried to do that with the midichlorians, and it was just a disaster. I mean,
it was a disaster.
At some point, you just have to assume a certain
That was something
way
that didn't
things
really
are.
need like more description than it's in us, it's through us, it works everything. Okay, that was enough.
Right.
After that,
That was good enough.
You
Well, no,
got
this
it
is like-
after that. You're like, okay, this is
Yeah.
basically telekinesis.
I guess you can see where like scientism has invaded our minds in the sense that like at one point in time you could basically say these are the assumed fundamental principles of the universe, and one of them that is assumed and is observed as working in the Jedi in Star Wars is the Force, right? And people are okay with that. You're like, okay? Like in the 80s, you guys are okay with that. You're like, yep, that's an assumed fundamental principle of that universe. We will operate with this assumption. Now everybody's like, prove it. You're like, but the Jedi lifted that. Prove it.
Well,
prove that
like
was
when
the
they
Force.
came out with the X-Men films,
Yeah.
I mean, it was a while ago, but like to your point, Caleb, it was sort of right after the Star Wars films came, all the X-Men films, and they had to go in length of like how it was a genetic
Oh,
mutation.
yeah,
And, they had to explain the whole thing to everybody. They couldn't just be like, "There's mutants."
Yeah, there's mutants in this universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I have. Go ahead, Adam. Were you talking?
Well, I'm just thinking. You were just talking about Star Wars and some mutants. What?
No, just
No,
stop.
I'm
X-Men.
so
X-Men.
lost. It's
X-Men.
incredible.
Stop. Dude, you can't.
X-Men after me.
You just can't do cultural references with Adam around. You just can't do it.
Well, so-
Are there mutants in Star Wars? I can't think.
We
of
can discuss
Maybe the
armies,
clone-
history,
The clones are technically mutants.
wrestling, jujitsu, broken down Nissan Titans. And,
that's a low
that
blow.
is.
I still don't.
well, he took a diesel shot last episode. Okay. Okay, so in listening to my Peter Kreeft lectures, somebody corrected me that it's Kreft. Is that correct, Bruce?
I've always said Kreeft. Maybe it is Kreft. I always hear him introduced by others as Kreeft.
I do too.
But
So
you
I
could be
think
right.
the person that corrected me is probably wrong. Let's go
What
with
if
that.
he's just never corrected anybody introducing him?
That's funny. So he pointed out in one of the lectures that, and I don't know if this was like sort of like a survey that was kind of across the world, or if it was in Britain, or if it was Britain in the U.S. or what. But anyway, he referenced some survey when people are asked to rank, best pieces of literature ever in the world. The Lord of the Rings trilogy always makes the top 10 and often makes number one.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who have a better appreciation for this work than
What's that Latin phrase that the Cardinals use, like, by your silence you are guilty or something?
then do I. Do you, I guess I'd say, where would you rank it on that sort of pieces of literature, and why? Would you put it at number 1? Would you put it at number 10? Would you put over it? I mean, don't ask me.
I would put the Brothers Karamazov above it, but I would put it as like 2 or 3. I
Yes,
think for
so
me,
he
the
also
highest
referen-
literature would be the Brothers Karamazov.
He also
I bet
referenced that Brothers
Yeah.
Karamazov as probably number 1 or 2. He would put this one, by the way.
Yeah, I would put it in the top 3, but I would put the Brothers ahead of it.
So why would you put it?
Because the
top 3?
psychology in the Brothers of the insight into human nature and motive is just so fascinatingly perceptive.
Yeah.
But I give Tolkien a high spot because he combines myth and poetry and develops a world in such detail.
And
I
languages.
mean, he creates basically what myth as we know it happened over hundreds or thousands of years to get to us as that, and he took it and made it like all in one shot.
Yeah.
And invented languages, prehistories, backgrounds, and was just very talented at poetry and writing. I mean, I actually remember this very vividly from The Hobbit when I was a kid reading it. And when they first spy Rivendell, and they're going down the mountain pass and they see it, and he says the smell of the pines made Bilbo drowsy. For whatever reason, that just always stuck in my mind because I don't associate things that way, but then the way he says it, it's almost like you can smell the pine trees. You know what he means if you've been in a pine forest before. So he just has a very poetic way of writing that I think I also can appreciate.
Yeah.
Probably what I lose. And what about you, Caleb?
Yeah, this is interesting because I think what I've learned in rereading these is that maybe it's just like where I am in life and the things I do and having kids and everything is my biggest struggle with this was length. It wasn't style and stuff like that. And so a story with similar qualities that was shorter and maybe a little less detail would probably be more just like fun for me.
So you don't
right
want to
now.
do like Ulysses or War and Peace next.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying like, I don't know, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe?
Like Lion the Witch, like reading. I mean, obviously, all of this has been
Agreed.
some of the for the job, but like when we did all of Narnia last year, Bruce. It was more fun.
Is that the
book
same
to
length
book.
or longer when you combine them all?
No, it's shorter.
Yeah,
it's
it is
probably
still
It's probably shorter than altogether. Probably shorter than the Fellowship of the Ring.
It's probably the length of Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
To be
Really?
honest,
I have the books. They just feel
they're like 90, depending on your copy. They're like 99 to 130 pages each of much shorter. So like because most of the Lord of the Rings texts are a full 11-inch book, 10-inch book, and the C.S. Lewis ones are half 2 inches shorter usually at least. So even with that, their page length is artificially bumped into the hundreds by being not a full spread. So and in terms of hours, I don't think it took as much reading. Now, of course, we split those up over more weeks when we did that. There's something more just fun about that to me. But the ranking for Tolkien, and I think this is why, gets affected by the fact that he's the source material for everything, and you can see why. That this read around, the story for me was really like about sort of this new age of men coming in. Like that's why I was trying to figure out. I had never like asked the question, why is the last book where they destroy the ring, and this is the Lord of the Rings, titled The Return of the King? Like, how does this become the Return of the King story? How is the ring attached to the Return of the King? Well, the Return of the King, like, without the return of a good king, the ring being destroyed doesn't actually bring any hope to the world of men. Like, the men who have already been corrupted by Sauron are still sort of there. Like, the Easterlings are still there. So what is the hope? The hope is that the ring is destroyed and a good king reigns. And stuff like that. So I'd probably, that's all a lot to say. I'd probably put it in the top 10, top 5 of books I like. I tend to, when I reread works of fiction, I tend to reread things like Lewis, but also the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, those ancient poetic stories.
What would you put above it? Do you have anything you would put above it?
Yeah, I would put the Iliad and the Aeneid above it. Like, I just would, like, the fiction book I reread the most is the Iliad. Now, I don't, like, so I would put it above it. And every time I restart the Iliad, I'm excited. Like, so, yeah, my dad's like looking over here, like, who did I raise? So that's probably what I would put above it. And I would probably put, like, the Chronicles of Narnia, I would probably say as one book, right? Like, as one thing. For me, I would put above it because there's something about it where, like, I'm going to be able to give it to my kids sooner. It has a direct utility for my evangelical practice of my faith. It's got a lot of fun in it. It sparks the imagination. We had a visiting pastor up here in Big Bear this week who's one of his sons just like kept talking about Narnia. You could already see like that in this. I think his son is 10 or 11.
He's going to be confirmed this year.
So maybe 12. Yeah. Like it's like in his imagination. Like, and so there's like a quality where it's like, oh, that makes a very good story. So I'd probably put that above it, and then Tolkien. And obviously he's the father of like what we have from modern fantasy in all medias. There's a thing going on right now, like a conflict going on where Dungeons, like the licensing company for Dungeons and Dragons, has caused this big thing by how you can monetize and where you can use the property. And I saw some commentary that was like, so you think you can copyright elves? Are you going to pay Tolkien in the grave? for that. Like it sort of referencing that something even like Dungeons and Dragons, which has had a huge resurgence, doesn't exist without Tolkien. Like that nobody wants to play that without the Lord of the Rings in this trilogy. So, yeah. So I don't know. It's definitely top. I think it's definitely top 10. It gave the Western world a connection to sort of like medieval fantasy again. And just, I think about how many things, like if you watched or you enjoyed things like Game of Thrones, you owe that to Tolkien. You owe like just a lot to these stories first.
So, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars don't do well in China. And the reason is because their characters are very black and white, good and bad. And Chinese traditional stories are yin and yang. So there's a mix, and you have to dislike the bad part of the character and like the good part of the character, but there's no like direct black and white. So like when Disney decided that they would bring Star Wars over to China, they thought it would be like, this is a huge market. And they were all like, this is dumb. It's like, nothing's like this black and white, good guy, bad guy stuff. So, yeah.
All right, Adam, as we wrap up, what do you think? Where would you put it in the world of literature?
I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't read a whole lot of literature. But, the one thing, I think I'm going to speak for you too, Scott. I think if we didn't have so many things going on in our life, we could really get into this book. The detail is, for lack of a better way of putting it, exquisite. I've probably used that word twice in my life. The story is incredible because it's so broad and wide in its scope. I keep thinking back. In fact, this morning as I was thinking about, oh boy, we're going to put on the headsets and record on this book today, and I was thinking the thing that has stuck in my mind over the last several weeks now is what Bruce said early on. I guess he was quoting Tolkien, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, where he said Tolkien said in this book or this series he was trying to, in a way, create a national myth for Britain.
Yeah.
Did you say something like that?
Yeah, he had said that. That's what later on in the interview he had said that.
Yeah, and this starts in the Shire and ends in the Shire. And I think, Tolkien being an Oxford man, he didn't live in the Cotswolds, I don't think.
He lived in Oxford.
But he lives in Oxfordshire, right? Or I think they pronounce it Oxfordshire out there. It's, in a way, the thing that I think is in what I like about the story, even though this isn't your question, Scott, is it's so local, agrarian, kind of simple life focused. It's a story like I don't read a lot of fiction. Never have, probably never will. There's just too many other things to do, other books to read. But of the fiction books I've read, of the stories, the epics and things I've read, I really like Caleb, the Aeneid. But that's because it has it has this major historical importance for the story of Rome. It's the national myth of Rome.
Yeah.
So I think the Lord of the Rings ranks up there. I have no idea what I'd put above it or what what number I'd assign to it, but I know it's significant. And I would say, in terms of literature, as Scott pronounces it, it's Scott's going to want to reach the screen and strangle me, but I think it's better than Chronicles of Narnia in terms of literature.
It probably is. I mean, not that my opinion matters on this, but
mine either.
You actually probably read the most literature of all of us, though, to be honest, because you like reading novels and stuff.
I do. I think if I were to give this a criticism, which no one will accept, a good piece of literature doesn't need to be this complicated. And that's my major beef with it, is that, he exhibits that he can write a story, that he can write fantasy, that he can write poetry, that he can invent languages, that he can create a universe, all this stuff that he's exceptionally talented. My question is always, do you have to do that all in one work? And when it just all seems like, and my other sort of criticism of it would be for just okay, it doesn't matter. I'm not an expert. It's just an opinion, people, in the comment section. That there are so many unconnected stories in here that if you are, at all a distractible kind of person, at all. Now, he lived in a world where there was much less distraction, right? But so if you're all a person that's easily distracted, you are going to gloss over those distractions in here, and just sort of look for the crib notes that is the main story of the book, which is something that stylistically that Lewis accomplishes in his fiction that is not accomplished here, and also not, I don't think, accomplished in The Hobbit either. Now, having said that, if you are somebody that really appreciates all those sort of complicated, interwoven, stylistic differences in a piece of literature or a piece of fiction, you probably think this is the greatest thing since Wonder Bread invented sliced bread. But I do read a lot. I'd say they're all. I'm actually looking at books on the shelf here, and I'm like, oh, look at that, Ed Abbey, the Monkey Wrench Gang, Hayduke Lives, Good News, The Fire on the Mountain. These are all very good stories from who I think is
Where the Red Fern Grows,
a well-renowned author. They're just not super complicated. They're just they're straightforward in a sense where you can have a good time with them by just following the story and kind of get out of your reality pretty easily and not have to work really hard at getting into the reality that the piece of fiction is presenting you. And that's the thing that I struggled with Tolkien, is that I had to work really hard to get into his reality that he's creating, whereas many, many other pieces of fiction, historical fiction or whatever, I don't have to work that hard. The story is very easy for me to put myself in, to get myself out of my world for a couple hours a day and into that one. And this is
so Tolkien's like your Old Testament, and Lewis is like your New Testament.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
That's perfect. That's perfect for me too. Scott and I are not the same person, but we have similar. Maybe it's because we're Gen X, but Bruce, you are too. So,
I think I could introduce Adam to some fiction that he would really enjoy more than this, if that makes any sense. Just because it's straightforward, it's got a historical connection that he'd appreciate. He could get through it quickly. It wouldn't be a huge time commitment, either mentally or in actual time, to get it done. And that's what this lacks for me. Now, having said that, again, I'm an unwashed heathen when this stuff comes.
I say the down, so I've talked about the upside of that is that Tolkien is the source material for everything, but the downside to that, with this sort of complicated nature, and the society that then came after this, is that the books are so up for personal interpretation that some of the themes and what good and what evil is just get transported, right? A major theme that I guess we haven't talked about is sort of black speech, right? Don't speak the language of.
So here we go.
Don't speak the language.
Peter Kreeft has a whole thing on that. Right. That's one of his best ones.
Don't speak the language of Mordor, and a lot of Sauron's power is in speaking, right? It's in deceiving. And Saruman. Yep. Also, yep. Okay, and is in speaking, and a lot of this conflict between the world of men is actually going to be determined by what word is in your ears, and. But you take a concept like that I don't think everybody who reads these sees, and you look at your own world and you go, yeah, a lot of things that I would call evil and the growing evil I see in my world have to do with black speech. Yeah. It has to do with what word is in people's ears. Well, the people on the who I would say are on the black speech side of things also love Tolkien. We're all Tolkien lovers, right? And so all of a sudden you realize whoever your enemy is, you can make into the one wielding black speech, right?
Yeah, but aren't we asking too much of Tolkien too? That Lewis set out to very much make an allegory. He's very clear about that. That's what he was trying to do. And Tolkien is very honest with us that he's not trying to do that.
Right. Yeah.
He's just trying to write a fiction story that is a mythology that people can get into. And so in one way, he has to make it accessible to people who might want a different allegory than the one that doesn't exist. But at the same time, I don't know. So, I do think Tolkien's work wants to have a certain formation, because I don't think you write that level and that depth without wanting to do some type of formation.
Yeah, I think you want people to understand what you actually thought was evil. There's an example. I saw it was like he was being interviewed by some probably BBC, right? I don't know, but basically about fans sending him engraved rings and engraved goblets with the words, like the words engraved on the ring, the One Ring inscription, and he would try to find ways to get them out of his home or use them for some other thing, because he's like, don't you understand that these words are evil, right? So the one example was he got this goblet. Somebody sent him a goblet with the inscription of the ring on it, and he said he ended up using it as an ashtray because he would never put his lips to it, because the speech inscripted on it was evil and was meant to be evil, not to be praised, right? And now we have, and he would have a very specific set of things that he would consider evil. He was a very moral man, and so.
But nothing in the books is hidden evil, really, right? It's pretty clear what he thinks is evil and what he thinks is not evil in the books.
Yeah.
That's part of the criticism of the books, is that it's too easy. There aren't a lot of complex characters who are good and evil in their kind of disposition. It's just easy to tell, that guy's good, that guy's bad. Mm-hmm. There's no good in the Nazgul. Nobody's well, they fly really well. There's no positive.
Got a knack for
things
taming
that people
dragons.
say about great leadership with that Witch King.
Yeah.
Leadership lessons from the Witch King of Angmar.
Yeah. But they're evil. They're evil because he, like my dad was saying, because he made them evil, not because you're sure exactly what they're going to do if the Nazgul actually gain power. You're never really sure, right? And so I think that part is if what you are able to pick up is that evil is evil by Tolkien's fiat in the book. Nazgul are obviously evil. He's not writing redeeming qualities. Sauron and Saruman, well, Saruman's maybe a little more gray, but Sauron's obviously evil. My point is that then who you as an individual determine evil in your world, you can just start ascribing to the evil powers in sort of this fantasy that lives in your imagination as well, right? So
you're saying people can subjectivize him
because everything's sort of by fiat and not by sort of these are their particular misdeeds. If that makes sense.
I feel like he does tell, though, what they're. I disagree with you on this particular point. I think he does say they're evil because they want to take over the world and corrupt it, and they want to bring in shadow and they want to bring in flame and they want to kill, they want to destroy the trees, they want to.
So don't you think? You're our people love this episode, Bruce, which I'm surprised by because it's so long. But you're our postmodernism guy, right? Corruption is now sort of what does it mean? For me, corruption may mean, so if we look at our society, I don't want to get too political, but corruption may be the end of free speech, seemingly the end of free speech in Western society. To me, is corruption. To somebody who's maybe on that side, the growing wave of hate speech and people pushing and fighting for hate speech is corruption over the land and darkness over the land. How does Tolkien actually help us navigate the moral dilemma of what is darkness and corruption over the land if the problem is just corruption? And everybody should know what corruption is.
Well, okay, I have an answer for you. And I agree with you that, in the postmodern worldview, it's not truly relativism as relativism is espoused as a philosophy, but it has that subjective side where truth is created, right? So I agree with you there. But I think the way that Tolkien gets around that, or maybe that's not even the right way to put it, how Tolkien isn't in that camp, is he actually shows the complexity of characters who are tempted to think that bad is good and shows you that that's wrong. So Gollum is a great example of a character who believes a lie and Frodo is always one who is tempted to believe that lie, and anyone who comes in contact with the ring is tempted to believe that lie, that something that is bad is good, and that something that is good is bad. And they always have, the different characters always have a justification for why they can make good of the ring. So I think what Tolkien is actually saying is there is objective evil. It's truly outside of us, and it really is. If you had the eyes to see it, let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. Let him who has eyes to see, let him see. If you had the truth, you would see how clearly your enemy walks around like a roaring lion seeking whom he would devour. But because you deny the truth is not in you, and your father is the devil. It's that sort of thing that Jesus talks about. It's not, the Pharisees don't see it because they don't have the truth. So I think Tolkien is saying, evil is objective, and it's powerful, and it's corruptive, and it's out there, and it's destroying us, and it's deceiving us, and it's tempting us. But you need the truth, the light of Elindi, whatever. You need that to see.
So much of this. I just
I had to
missed.
throw that in there.
I missed so much of this. All right, and we are at an hour, so let's
we are at an hour, and I'll just say, I guess,
are we doing the Silmarillion next week?
Yeah, the difference here, Bruce, I guess, is like. And Tolkien comes out and says this when he's not writing a particularly Christian thing, is Tolkien doesn't, I think, attempt to give you the light or the truth in this world, right? Like, so Christ is sort of absent. I mean, you could say that
he's not Lewis.
He's
not going to give that to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that I guess it's just my one critique is, without that, when you make such a strong proposition about how the truth will set you free, we'll tell you, we'll show you the darkness in this world, we'll give you the motivation to keep moving through the perilous journey of life, and then to sort of leave it that truth's out there is very. But I don't brutal.
Want Tolkien to give me truth, and I don't even want Lewis to give me truth. I mean, I want the Scripture to give me truth, and then it'll either agree with Lewis or it'll agree with Tolkien or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. That proclamation actually has to do the work.
That's what Lewis does. Okay, on that episode, on that little note there, this ended up being a good episode. It started a little slow, but it really picked up there at the end. So,
like the last book.
Just like the last book.
I think if the Silmarillion is done on the Thinking Fellows, it should probably be a Caleb and Bruce show. What do you think about that, Adam?
I agree.
Yeah. So next week will be one of the topics from Bruce's list. Magical list. I assume the magical list.
My magical list.
But other than that,
I'll let you.
It really is.
It's a great list.
I'll let you close it since I don't remember the closing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinking Fellows podcast. If you enjoyed this show, enjoyed this series, found any benefit from it, please consider subscribing. You can do so for free in your favorite podcasting apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Podcast Addict, and so many more. If you would like to see the Thinking Fellows continue to go on in the 1517 podcast network, continue to expand and provide free content, you can help us out by financially supporting this show and the rest of 1517 by going to 1517.org/donate. And we are very thankful for the listeners who have financially supported us and continue to financially support our endeavor. We will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.